Let's begin today with a question. What's an area of your life that you wish you cared more about than it turns out you do? Could be a big thing, a small thing. I mean, we all have these things in our lives, right? It's something your health or your finances or relationship or whatever. The things that we wish it was different, we just struggle to make it so. I got those areas in my life, like everybody, and one of them is cooking. And I don't mean that I wish that I was like a chef or worked in a commercial kitchen or something like that. I mean, I wish that I cared more about, like preparing food to feed myself and my family on a regular basis. For most of my life, my idea of cooking has been to pour the milk into the cereal bowl, press the buttons on the microwave, and we're good to go. And I've been able to get away with that. It's not good, but it's good enough. But then I had a family, and they're all used to eating like a variety of things on a regular basis. And so I've had to deal with my issues, the nerve of wanting a variety of meals on a regular basis. And so, when I think about cooking, I get uncomfortable because I don't really know what I'm doing. I think about all the effort I've put in the past to try to get better, and it wasn't really all that fun. I think about the time. My gosh, the time it takes to plan meals, do all the grocery shopping, get everything ready to go, cook it all, plate, serve it, dishes. I mean, we're talking hours of effort for like 10 minutes of enjoyment. I mean, what are we doing? So those are my issues. I know I have to deal with them. And I've tried to fix it, but to no avail. And it's kind of like when you hear me talk about it, no wonder, right? I mean, how do you honestly get better at a practice that you perceive to be a threat to your time, your energy, and your motivation? And here's the really interesting thing to me, because I've thought a lot about this. I might call it my cooking dilemma. Some of you, I've been around you, and you love cooking. And I don't get that. And I've been around many more of you who simply don't mind cooking. And I definitely don't get that. And I don't understand it. Like, it costs you the same time, same limited energy, same limited motivation as me, and yet we experience this practice very differently. And I just think that's a really interesting thing to sit with for a second, especially in light of where we've been throughout the last 9 or so weeks with this series we've called Habits of Grace. And this series for us has been something of a vision series for this church family. As we say all the time, our mission here is to practice the way of Jesus together. And what we mean by that is that we want to be a community that grows in this thing we call the 7 marks of a disciple: identity in Jesus and the lifestyle of Jesus and responsiveness to the Spirit, engagement in biblical community, serving others, sharing Jesus and making disciples. Like, that's who we want to be as a church family. And so for the last 9 or so weeks, we've introduced you to 9 practices, spiritual disciplines, what we might call habits of grace, that are meant to help us live more fully into life with God and life in community. These practices, for our part, these practices are how we make ourselves available to God so that through His Spirit, He can transform us to be more like Jesus. But if you've been tracking throughout this series, then my guess is that you have found yourself experiencing both sides of my little cooking dilemma. Some of these practices we've talked about, you love. You've done them before, you're good at them, you're proficient in them. But then there's other practices that we've talked about, and like, what? Never heard of that before. I didn't know Christians did that. Or, man, that's really uncomfortable, and you try it, and it doesn't go so well. And man, I just want to say that's okay. Like, we use this language of upstream practices and downstream practices for a reason. You could think of downstream practices as those that come easily or intuitively to us. They cost us time and energy and motivation, but they're experienced joyfully. There are some practices like that. But then there's upstream practices, and these are the ones that come to us with difficulty and confusion. They cost us time, energy, and motivation, and we feel it almost every time we try. And I just want to flag that concept for a couple of reasons today. First is this series, the title of it, Habits of Grace. We didn't just call it that because we think that these different practices are God's grace to us to help us be in relationship with Him. That's definitely true. We called it that because it is such an important thing to remember that we have to have grace for ourselves and for one another as we live into all of these different practices. Some of them will click right into place and be natural and easy, and some will be difficult and take a lifetime. And that's okay. That is okay. The second reason I wanted to flag that concept is because I think it's important for you to know kind of where I'm coming from today. So the practice we're going to be talking about is service. And I consider this practice to be upstream for me, which means that I'm not standing up here like some kind of expert full of a bunch of stories and just follow me like I follow Jesus. I'm standing up here as someone who wants and needs to lean in and get better here. We have a lot of people who are downstream in this practice, much further along in this practice than me in this community. And you guys are all such a gift to us. And we're so grateful that you're here. And I'm mostly not talking to you today. I'm talking to all of us who feel service maybe as an upstream practice. We wish we cared more than we do. We wish we had more traction, but gosh, time, energy, motivation, we just can't seem to get there. And the temptation, of course, with any upstream practice is to simply ignore it. I mean, if it's not fun, if it's not easy, if it doesn't come right away, if I don't have time for it, then maybe we could just skip it. I don't know, like just not do it. And that sounds right. Maybe just lean into downstream practices. But here's the problem. And this is something that I learned in my little cooking excursions. I could ignore this practice, this upstream practice of cooking for the rest of my life. Done it for like 30-something years. I could keep going. But I started to realize two things. First is by ignoring this uncomfortable practice, I was actually like sabotaging some of my downstream practices, like exercise. I enjoy exercising. It's very life-giving to me. But nothing sabotages a good workout like a bad diet. And so I was hurting myself. But the other thing that I realized is that if I didn't pay attention to this practice, it may feel good now to ignore it, but if I didn't pay attention to this, then it was probably going to cost me something better later in my desired future. Because I started to see that families that have a deep shared life together, they seem to prioritize what can only happen around the dinner table when you connect over meals. And I didn't want to give my kids a bad attitude towards cooking, but I definitely didn't want to miss the kind of life together that's possible around the table. And so I had to lean in there. Had to lean into that. And that's the other important point about these upstream and downstream practices. Downstream practices feel easy, and so they tend to be very life-giving to us. But upstream practices, it's because they feel difficult that they tend to be most life-altering. But they work because they work together, encouraging and challenging us, sustaining us and pushing us forward, one day at a time for a lifetime. To flourish in our lives now and to experience the desired future that we want for ourselves later, we need both. Because as followers of Jesus, the ultimate goal, of course, is to become people of love. People who are so saturated with the life and love of the Trinity that it just spills out into every sphere of our lives and our relationships and our spheres of influence. And so, in order to become people like that, we need a practice. And the practice for today is service. So I've said it a few times. Let me go ahead and give you a definition. This is from pastor and author Tyler Staton. He says, service is the spiritual practice of expressing Christ-like love through meeting the practical needs of another, especially those most in need of help. And you know, it's kind of interesting. You can always tell how important a practice is to the way of Jesus by whether or not you can tell the Jesus story without it. And you definitely cannot tell the Jesus story without the practice of service. In fact, Jesus himself once said this: "The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." These words from Jesus, they are an echo from something written by the prophet Isaiah hundreds of years earlier in his own poetry, and specifically 4 poems or songs that became known as the servant songs. And the servant songs of Isaiah, they tell the story of a coming messianic king who will bring God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. But this king won't be like you've seen before. He won't conquer through conquest and violence and the normal means that kings use. Instead, he's going to do it the other way, through suffering and through service. And so when Jesus steps on the scene and says, the Son of Man didn't come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many, this should have been the best news anyone in Israel had ever heard. This is what they had been hoping for, waiting for, what Isaiah had talked about. But the interesting thing is that it was the actual manner of Jesus' life, the way he lived and moved about the world, that made people so uncomfortable with him. And they didn't know quite what to do with Jesus. And we dare not be too quick to judge them, right? Because they lived then, just like we do now, in a world that is dominated by competition and one-upsmanship, where power is often accumulated by a few at the expense of the many, where influence is something that you cobble together to build yourself up. That's how the world works, then as much as now. And I think that's why service is such a hard practice for so many of us. It belongs in a world that we desire, a world that we hope for, but not the one that we see and experience in our everyday lives. And actually, it was just like this for the first disciples of Jesus. So I'd love for you to join me in Mark chapter 9. That's where we'll be today for the next few minutes. And we're going to pick it up in verse 14. And one thing you need to know while you're pulling it up on your phone or opening up your Bible is just a little bit of context. The verses immediately before where we're going to start reading is the story where Jesus takes three of his friends, Peter, James, and John. They go up to the top of a mountain, and there Jesus is transfigured. And the disciples see him in his glorious, like, Trinitarian presence of God fullness. And it's this amazing moment. And we're going to pick it up right after they come down the mountain. So, Mark chapter 9, 14 and following. And actually, I'm just going to read this over you. You're welcome to follow along on the screens. You can get comfortable. You can close your eyes if you want, and just let the words and the story wash over you. The four of them, Mark says, made their way back to the other disciples. There they saw a large crowd surrounding them and legal experts arguing with them. As soon as the crowd saw Jesus, they were astounded, and they all ran up to greet him. "What's all the fuss about?" he asked. "Teacher," said someone from the crowd, "I brought my son to you. He's got a spirit that stops him speaking. Whenever it takes hold of him, it throws him on the ground. He foams at the mouth, he grinds his teeth and goes rigid. I spoke to your disciples about casting it out, but they couldn't." "You unbelieving generation," replied Jesus, "how much longer must I be with you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring the boy to me." So they brought the boy to him. And when the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion, and he fell on the ground and rolled about and foamed at the mouth. "How long has it been like this with him?" asked Jesus. "Since childhood," replied the man. "Often it throws him into fire or water to kill him, but if you can do anything, please help us. Have pity on us." "What do you mean, if you can?" replied Jesus. "Everything is possible to someone who believes." At this, the father gave a great shout. "I do believe," he roared. "Help me in my unbelief." Jesus saw the crowd was getting bigger by the minute. He scolded the unclean spirit. "Speechless and deaf spirit," he said, "I command you, come out of him and never go back again." The spirit yelled, gave the boy a huge convulsion, and came out. The boy seemed to be dead. In fact, several people said, "I think he's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and helped him to his feet, and he stood up. "Why couldn't we cast it out?" asked his disciples once they were back in the house by themselves. "This sort," replied Jesus, "can only be cast out by prayer." So they went from there and were traveling through Galilee. Jesus didn't want anyone to know because he was teaching his disciples. "The Son of Man," he was saying, "is to be given into human hands. They will kill him, And when he's been killed, after 3 days, he will rise again." They didn't understand the saying and were afraid to ask him. They came to Capernaum. When they got into the house, he asked them, "What were you guys arguing about on the road?" They said nothing, because on the road they had been arguing about which of them was the greatest. Jesus sat down and called the 12. "If you want to be first," he said, "you must be last of all and servant of all." He then took a small child and stood him in the middle of them. Then he hugged the child and said to them, "If anyone welcomes one child like this in my name, they welcome me. And if anyone welcomes me, it isn't me they welcome, but the one who sent me." Those are the words of Jesus. So let's make a few observations and kind of work our way back through the story. The first thing I want you to notice is something kind of subtle happening as we dive into this story, in that Jesus has just been privately exalted on the mountaintop in the presence of his Father and 3 close friends. But as they come down the mountain, the scene that's unfolding is that the disciples are being publicly embarrassed as they fail to cast a demon out of a young boy. And mercifully, when Jesus arrives to the scene, all attention drops from them and it turns to Jesus as the Father runs up to see if Jesus can help him. And of course, he's skeptical now. Years of pain, failed attempts to help his son, and even this latest moment where the disciples even failed. They have made him skeptical, but still he comes to Jesus and asks. And the crowds are pressing in, and the skeptics are looking down their noses, and the tension is building. But out of this moment of tension comes one of the most beautiful confessions in the Gospels. "I believe," says the Father. "Help me in my unbelief." And I just think those words are everything. They have been everything to followers of Jesus for thousands of years now. People like you and me who in times and seasons where we have struggled to trust Jesus, we find that sometimes the best prayer is the true one. "I believe, but help me in all the ways that I am struggling to believe." And you know what? Jesus responds to faith like that. And he heals this boy and he helps this father. And so afterwards, the disciples are taken by Jesus down through Galilee, and this is kind of a secret trip because Jesus wants to say some hard things to them. He says the time is coming for the suffering servant to give his life as a ransom for many. But the disciples don't understand what he's talking about. They're too afraid to even ask him what he means. And so that moment, it just hangs in the air, completely unresolved, as Mark introduces to us something we didn't know before. That on the road, the disciples had been having a bit of a conversation. And so Jesus asks them, what were you guys talking about when we were walking here to Capernaum? And the disciples don't want to say anything because the topic was, who is the greatest? Which of us is the greatest? And this conversation kind of makes sense when you see the whole story unfold, right? Like 3 of the disciples were just invited on this special secret errand with Jesus up the mountain for a spiritual retreat. And what they saw, they're not even allowed to talk about it. It was so big and important. But these other 9 disciples, they're just trying to save face. They're embarrassed. They just made fools of themselves in front of this crowd, and they weren't invited on the special errand with Jesus up the mountain. And so everybody's just arguing, just jockeying for position, just trying to figure out where they stand in this coming kingdom that Jesus is planning to bring. Who's the greatest? And so Jesus pulls them all in close. And he says, guys, I don't think you understand. Greatness doesn't seem to be much at all like what you think it is. In my kingdom, the one who wants to be first, they must become last, a servant of all. This word first, it speaks in terms of priority and authority and influence. And it's so interesting to me that Jesus here is saying, listen, first is totally subjective. It depends on who you ask. and it depends on what you mean by greatness. Ask the world, and they will tell you that greatness looks a lot like the elevation of oneself up through the ranks. But I'm telling you that if you want to be great in my kingdom, you need a different definition of greatness. You need a new definition of greatness. But the disciples, they're not getting it. And so Jesus gives them an illustration. And he calls this little child over and places the child before his disciples. And he does something that nobody expected. The Messiah King hugs that precious little image bearer of God. And hours after these very same disciples had failed to heal a young boy that needed help, Jesus puts another small child in front of them. And he says this to his confused followers: if anyone welcomes one child like this in my name, they welcome me. And if anyone welcomes me, it isn't me they welcome, but the one who sent me. You know, I can't help but wonder if this moment wasn't somehow commentary on what had just happened in the previous scene. Because that word welcome that Jesus uses here, it's the idea of seeing someone, of attending to them, of showing hospitality towards them. And here in this moment, Jesus is basically saying, you could think of welcome as what happens when we get into the habit of seeing people that God loves and treating them as if we want them to know it. And like I said, I can't help but wonder if this whole moment's not commentary on what the disciples had just experienced. Like perhaps the reason they couldn't help the boy that needed the demon exorcised was because they never actually saw him. Like perhaps they were too focused on the crowds that were gathering and pressing in around them who needed to see a show. Perhaps they were too focused on the skeptics who needed to be silenced in that moment and proven wrong. And perhaps the disciples missed that moment and missed that boy because for them that moment was never really about him. It was about them and a chance to use their power, their spiritual authority to increase their influence and their authority and their reputation and their status within their desired story. And so to reframe everything for them, Jesus sits down a small child, and the King of Kings welcomes the most vulnerable among them with an embrace. It's a beautiful, profound moment. But then Jesus goes a step further, and he says, if you welcome even one child such as this, you're not just welcoming this child, you're welcoming me. But you're not just welcoming me, you're welcoming the one who sent me. And it's like, what? It reminds me so much of something else that Jesus said much later in his ministry at the end of Matthew's gospel, actually in chapter 25. When Jesus has his followers around, he's telling them what things are going to be like at the end of the age. And he says at the end of the age, everyone's going to be gathered together, but then they're going to be separated into two groups, the sheep on one side and the goats on another. And the sheep are all of the righteous ones who stand to inherit the kingdom of God. And let me tell you who they are. They're the ones who fed me when I was hungry and who gave me drink when I was thirsty, who visited me when I was alone, who clothed me when I was naked. And the righteous will say, Lord, when did we ever see you in any of those states? When were you ever like that? And the king will respond to them, I'm telling you the truth. When you did it to one of the least significant of my brothers and sisters here, you did it to me. And the point of this passage in Mark chapter 9, none of this is about how you earn your salvation through good works of service or anything like that. It's actually the exact opposite point. Jesus' point is that if you belong to the suffering servant, and if you are becoming more like him, then over time you should expect that your life will be marked by suffering and serving. Otherwise, how do you know that you actually belong to him? How do you know that you're actually becoming like him. Service is how we demonstrate our love for people. And demonstrating our love for people is how we demonstrate our love for Jesus. And demonstrating our love for Jesus is how we demonstrate our love for the Father who sent his only Son to die for all the people that he loves. That's why service is so important. But it kind of brings us back to where we started, doesn't it? Like, okay, great, I hear what you're saying. But how do I care more about something that I struggle to care about? How do I lean into an upstream practice against all of the tension of the time and the energy and the motivation? How do I work on all of that? So a couple years ago, I was kind of fed up with my posture towards cooking. Once I realized that it was kind of costing me in terms of downstream practices that I enjoyed, like exercise. And once I realized it was probably going to be costing me in terms of my desired future, we finally decided to do something about it. And the something we decided to do was subscribe to a meal box service. I'm not sure that's the best answer. It's definitely not the only answer, but it was a way for us to lean in here. And so every week now, someone who loves cooking way more than I ever will sends us curated meals to cook, and it's good food, and it's more diverse than we'd ever cook otherwise. And they send me all the directions so that even I can't mess it up that badly. And it's great. I still, I don't love cooking, but I stand here today, I'm like, we're cooking more and eating better than we ever have. And I don't love it, but I love what it's doing to our life together as a family. And I may never be great at it, but it just occurred to me, like, I guess I can meal box my way into life change. Who knew? And so it is, I think, with all upstream practices. We don't have to love them before we lean into them. We don't have to be great at them before we try to make progress. All we have to do is practice. All we have to do is practice. And I want you to please hear what I'm saying. This is not a why aren't you doing more for God kind of a message today. This is way more of a what do you really want kind of a message. And as you ask yourself that question, if your answer is something like, I want to be great in the kingdom of God, if your answer is something like, I want to be more like Jesus, then the thing you and I must do is cultivate a deep love for people. And there are few better ways to do that than through practice. The takeaway today is not go out and fill your schedule and your life with a bunch of new activities and new rhythms and new relationships and new commitments because we have to get it done tomorrow. The invitation today, the takeaway today is much simpler. Just start where you are. Start small and start today. And so as we kind of wrap up the gathering today, I just want to give you 3 ideas to kind of help you do that. 3 kind of meal boxy suggestions for leaning into this practice. And I would just encourage you to invite the Spirit of God to speak to you. He knows you much better than I do, and he knows what your next step needs to be much better than I do. So take these suggestions and just let the Lord speak to you about what he would have for you next. And I kind of want to organize these around the tensions that we talked about earlier, time, energy, and motivation. So the first is time. Listen, we're busy people, aren't we? And as a fellow busy person myself, I can say that like busyness, it's not just the occasional state of my schedule. It is often the disposition, the posture of my heart. And I've learned about myself, I don't like interruptions. Busy people, we don't like interruptions, do we? In fact, a lot of us go out of our way to not be interruptible throughout the day. But I think that's what so blows me away about the life of Jesus is just how available he seemed to be to people all the time, no matter what was going on. And I think he understood something that I often forget, which is that sacred moments, they often come through interruptions. Stopping to talk with that coworker that we just don't have time for right now. Stopping to help a kiddo when you'd rather be doing something else. Letting your preferred schedule and weekly plans collapse around the needs of a friend in crisis. Sacred moments are often on the other side of an interruption. And I think that's what Jesus was trying to help these disciples see by placing this little child in front of them and trying to get them to actually see him. You have to be interruptible if you want to serve people, because you have to be able to see them first and see their needs in order to lean in, which means for many of us, our existing spheres of influence is the place where we need to pay attention here. The people in our family and in our friend group and in our neighborhood and our coworkers, the ones who are most likely to interrupt us and the ones who we are best positioned to serve. And so I know for me, sometimes the first change of gear is a mental one. From thinking of myself as I am busy to, you know what? I'm interruptible. And I'm going to choose to see all of those little unexpected obstacles throughout the day, not as things that I need to overcome or ignore, but as invitations, as triggers to lean in and maybe serve somebody. There's no way you can answer every interruption, nor should you try. But the good thing is there will be another interruption shortly and another opportunity to lean in. The second thing, in terms of energy, listen, when it comes to cooking, this was always one of the biggest issues for me. Feeling that overwhelming pressure of having to answer the question, what are we going to eat for dinner tonight, every single night for the rest of my life, that can be overwhelming, right? And so meal boxes have been a way for us to create a rhythm 3 times a week. It's enough to stretch us, but not enough to overwhelm us. And I think something like that is true with a practice like serving as well. A lot of it, we all have limited energy. And I know that most of us feel like we are spending just about all we have maintaining our lives as they are. And so the last thing that we can think about doing is taking on the needs of the world and all the challenges and problems. And how am I going to fit that in? I get it. It can be overwhelming. And that sense we have is not totally misplaced, by the way. There are more people with more challenges and more needs than we could ever possibly hope to meet. But we've not been called to fix everything. We've been called to love and serve people. So we don't need to do it all. And that's where the power of rhythm comes into play. Rhythms allow us to channel and amplify our limited energy towards greater and greater ends. This is why, actually, we tell you all the time, you should jump into a ministry team if you're not serving around here. You should get in a community group that serves together once a month, or you should check out one of our city partnerships. The reason we tell you that is because the church meets every single week. We do the same kinds of things every single month. And so if you can locate yourself within the rhythms of a life like that, or of a community like that, you will find people and needs that you can serve. And it will not take you way, way, way out of the way of your normal life. That's the second thing, getting into rhythm. And the third is just specific to motivation. As I said to you a couple minutes ago, I still don't love cooking, but I love what it's doing to our family life, our shared life together. And I have found that by doing the practice, my motivation for doing the practice has changed over time. And I guess I just want to end with expressing that as my hope for us here. Whether this practice is upstream for you or downstream, whether you are just an exemplar in our community or this is brand new for you, I hope that we find that our motivation for serving is not guilt or obligation, or because you have a little bit more free time or you're just bored in this season of life, or because we're trying to earn God's favor or status in this community, or even because I'm telling you to do it today. I hope that our motivations for serving people will be out of our pursuit of Jesus, and that our pursuit of Jesus is having its intended effect, transforming us into people of love. And that as we are transformed into people of love, we will find expression through the practice of service. So that however we serve, however this lands for us, all of us will over time find ourselves more and more being the embodiment of Jesus' vision for his followers that he expressed on the night that he washed their feet, just before he died for the sins of the world. And he said, "Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." And then he says at the end of that chapter, "A new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know you are my disciples, if you love one another. 7 Marks, may we be people known by our love expressed through service. And may our practice of service transform us into people of love.